from the very first moment on, we knew we needed to raise money. And that was kind of the focus of our first year out of business school. We were like, hey, let's give each other 6 months to raise financing. If it works, great, we're going to continue. If it doesn't work, then that's it. We got to go back to Germany and move on.
Awesome. All right. Welcome back to From Grit to Growth. I'm Jennifer D'Amata. I'm joined with my co-host, Mark Haysbrook. And I am super excited to bring on our guest today, Chris Wichert, he's the CEO and one of the founders of Koio. And I found this amazing website with these amazing shoes. When I was searching for shoes for my husband, I was looking for what I always look for, which is sometimes a needle in a haystack, very high quality, very comfortable, very beautiful sneaker at a price that's truly accessible. And his website came up immediately. And so we bought the shoes. My husband loves these shoes, by the way. He is, they're on every Friday afternoon when we go out and have a drink or go to listen to jazz or whatever we do. So welcome, Chris. I would love for you to just maybe introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. You have an awesome background from your Wharton school days to founding this beautiful company that you've had for 10 years now. And I'd love to give you the floor on that.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, guys. Very excited for this. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Chris. I grew up in Germany. I went to school there, then started my career in investment banking, and pretty quickly realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, even though I kind of enjoyed working on finances. But I wanted to be in a more creative world. So I moved to the US, did my MBA at Wharton, and connected and found my co-founder there in Johannes, another guy from Germany. But we happened to be the only two Germans in our year of 800 people at Wharton, and connected over our mutual love for sneakers and Italian craftsmanship. And that was during a time when the DTC era just like started a couple of years ago. There was a lot of hype around it. We were inspired by the Warby Parker guys that went to our school, that were our graduation speakers. And we wanted to do something on our own that was centered around footwear, that was centered around Italian craftsmanship. So we started thinking about what is it that we should do. And our idea at the time was to build a modern version of a luxury brand, to take like products such as sneakers that are typically made by high-end luxury brands, make them the exact same way in Italy, handmade with the best materials, the best leathers, and then, build a brand around it that our generation can associate with and can identify with. A brand that doesn't feel exclusive, but inclusive, and that doesn't feel super high priced, but accessible, and that isn't offline, but online. So that was the idea in 2015 when we started the brand, and that was the inception of Koio.
How did you decide the manufacturing process, not having that in your history or your family or your genealogy or anything? Shoes are tough. And you went to Italy and you chose, I believe, from maybe a couple dozen different companies to make the shoes for you. Walk me through that process a little bit.
Well, very early on, we didn't want or think we needed to go to Italy. We thought we could do it out of New York. It was a kind of naive, like we were thinking all these manufacturers had websites. It was easy to just get going, but pretty quickly realized that wasn't the case. Ran into dead end after dead end. And at some point we're like, I guess we have to go there and like kind of break into this secretive society. So we went to Italy and decided to just look for the best shoemakers there that can help us bring this vision to life. We traveled around the country for around 4 weeks, and we're literally knocking on manufacturers' doors. And the early manufacturers that we found, we weren't too excited about. The the products didn't really stand out to us. So we kept looking. Like we really wanted to build this like high-end version of a shoe. Like it should feel like just perfect. And literally on the last day of our trip, we found a manufacturer that at that time was a family business that was exclusively working for Chanel.
Mm.
And we talked to the owner. He bought into our vision of making luxury more accessible and liked the idea. And we loved his attention to detail, his level of craftsmanship. So we started working on a project together for like 300 pairs initially. And the prototypes that we got back were just another level compared to anyone else that we'd seen before. So we started working together.
It's such an important lesson that you can't do everything virtually on a Zoom or whatnot. Sometimes you got to get your hands dirty. You've got to go there, especially to manufacturers and factories and stuff like that. You've got to check out the product. You know, if you're going to make something as high quality as Koio, that sounds like exactly the type of move you'd need to make such a successful brand. I love that. When you skipping forward a little bit, you finally got a product that you want to put out to the world. I think, tell me if this is right. I think I read something, you started with pop-ups on some level. I don't know if you also started with direct to consumer at the same time, but you started with pop-ups, and it seemed like somewhat of an inflection point to go from, we've got to stop thinking about ourselves as building products and start thinking about ourselves as building a brand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had no experience in anything really, right? Other than the couple of years that we did in investment banking and consulting before. So we didn't know how to build a website. We didn't know how to make a shoe. We didn't know how to sell a shoe online. We needed to figure all of that out. And we set up a website very early on. But in order to get traction, we focused on building a small community, like starting with our circle of friends and starting with our group in New York. So initially, in order to open, we did a little pop-up shop in New York for just a weekend. Unfortunately, at that time, it was like the coldest 3 days in New York that were recorded. It was snowing. It was a snowstorm, and like we had all these high expectations of how many shoes we were going to sell, and not a single person was coming through the door other than our friends. So we sent them out on the streets in the snow, handing out flyers, going into other coffee shops, and like trying to get people there. The first couple days were a complete bust, but then we ran the pop-up for a week, and we saw people coming through, and we saw people really liking the shoe, engaging with it, and buying it. And we then shifted to selling online, but we found it challenging because the shoes were at the time around $300. No one had heard of Koio, and we didn't really know how to advertise a product of that price on Meta or Google. So it was challenging for us. And we were like, we need to try something different. Clearly, when people see the shoes, they love them. So what we were doing was like another thing similar to like going to Italy, like very trying to get our hands dirty. We asked other store owners in Soho if we could come in to their store for the weekend, display our shoes, and give them a cut of whatever money we make. And surprisingly, some of the stores were open to it. So we did that. And then we went from like just like selling maybe one pair online at the time to selling 20 pairs in an afternoon at one of these pop-up events.
Wow.
So we realized there was something there, and we didn't really know how to get that online yet. And that was kind of the starting point.
What did you learn from those early customers? I'm always intrigued with founders like you in a competitive market, but with a unique product. So when you strike me as someone that would probably spend some time talking to the customers, what did you learn from them, and how did that shape your journey?
Yeah, one example I can give you was originally we were intending to make these shoes only for men, but then we saw that women were buying the small sizes, and from the very get-go, they liked our shoes too. So pretty quickly, we became a unisex brand, offering shoes for men and women early on. I think talking to customers has just been like generally a good lesson throughout the years. I think we've done surveys, we've done interviews with our best customers, we've done interviews with people who were complaining and stopped shopping with us just in order to see what we can do better and how we can improve.
Hmm.
So you've got yourself a business now. You're growing. How do you maintain the craftsmanship in your shoe, and how do you maintain all this high quality, high touch, and scale this brand?
Yeah, that was also a learning curve. And I think ultimately we needed to go to Italy pretty frequently, and we needed to have quality control both in Italy and at our warehouse. Originally, when we started, we would just have them ship the products to the US, and then essentially only realized at the customer stage that if there was an issue. Um,
Hmm.
that wasn't ideal. Then we rolled it back. We started doing QC at the warehouse. That was still not ideal because we still had to ship the shoes back that weren't good to Italy. So we started doing QC in Italy. Um, and very frequent touch points. I think we have weekly meetings with our manufacturer where we're looking at new prototypes, where we're discussing product feedback, customer feedback, and then we're going to Italy probably twice a year to really like sit down and review like some of the changes, some of the materials, some of the shoes that are doing well. So I think ultimately it comes down to running a tight progress, very good and frequent, transparent communication, and starting the quality control as early as possible.
Hmm.
Were you able to see some pattern in what it cost you to get a customer and then how often they came back? My guess is you've got some very loyal customers that might come back once or twice a year. And then there's the ones that just buy once, and then there's the ones that are the outliers that buy, 10 or 12. But what was the sweet spot for you in acquiring those customers, making sure you don't spend too much to get them?
Yeah, I mean, like the customer acquisition in general has been challenging over the last few years. It was very different like 10 years ago when we first started out. The market has become hyper competitive in the last 5 years. And I think our approach has always been to be brand first,
Yeah.
to not try to just acquire customers online through digital ads. But to really invest in our brand alongside, right? I think we we want to stand for Italian craftsmanship. We want to stand for offering you a pair of shoes that you can easily dress up or down for any kind of occasion, whether you go on a date, whether you go to the office, whether you're presenting in front of someone, whether you just go shopping. Like our shoes should always make you feel comfortable and confident in whatever you're doing next. And this brand message is what we've invested in predominantly, rather than chasing the next
Right.
customer. So I think I think generally that's like a very important pillar there. And then in terms of customer acquisition, again, we learned early on that physical retail works for us. So when we've gone into omni-channel very early on, we built our own retail stores. We still have a store in Soho. Pre-pandemic, there was a phase where we had stores in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Miami.
Oh, really?
Unfortunately,
Oh,
with the pandemic, we had to close a lot of these stores and reallocate our very limited resources in other areas. But there was an element of retail working for us, and similarly, we worked with a few wholesale partners as well to increase visibility and
right.
desirability.
Yeah. What was the blend between your direct to consumer and wholesale? Did you have a 50-50%? split, or was it more direct consumer?
Pre-pandemic, I think we were 40% retail at some point, and then overnight that
Wow.
revenue just disappeared.
Wow.
And also the use case for our shoes that I mentioned earlier, dates, going to the office, going dressing up for a nice event, all of these use cases disappeared. So we really had to reinvent ourselves during the pandemic. And um, one big thing that we did was we focused vigorously on sustainability and made sustainability part of our mission. That was for us like the inflection point during COVID. We shifted away from retail. We sh- so that we still have some retail. I think right now it's like maybe 10%, and a little bit of wholesale, but the majority is now our online store.
Direct consumer. Okay. So you have a founder, co-founder, Johannes, right? And you and him went to Wharton School together.
Mhm.
And I was reading, you tell me if this is right. You guys were college roommates, but you even lived together for quite some time as business partners, really. So you're seeing each other all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
So how do you what's the balance, how do you guys operate together in business lives, and how do you guys kind of keep it where you're working together dynamically and effectively and working through any healthy conflict or anything like that? I know we've got founders and listeners that have business partners, and sometimes it's going well and sometimes it's hard. So how do you guys work through it?
I think it's never going to be easy, right? I think if you're spending so much time with each other and you're both invested in the business and passionate in the business, ultimately you're different people with slightly different ideas. So I don't think there's a situation where it's going to be easy. But I think what's very important in this process is, yeah, that you don't try to mix business and private life too much, right? And that was something that we needed to learn as well. Like if we were in the beginning when we were living together, um, after work, that we wouldn't just like keep talking about business topics and keep discussing these things, but kind of made a clear cut so that we could maintain our friendship. Um, but over the years, we naturally like moved out and moved into our own places. I mean, we're not like 28 anymore, and have grown up as well. And I think that's healthy too. I think ultimately you need to have a little bit of a separation or a degree of separation, a degree of distance, so that it doesn't become too much. And I think, yeah, when we were working together and living together, that was probably a little bit too much. That was probably not the ideal setup. Initially during college, that was perfectly fine when we were just like brainstorming and doing a couple hours here or a couple hours there. But once this became our full focus, full time job, I think having a degree of separation
Yeah.
made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I think is super important is, and that was also a little bit tricky for us initially, is because we both had a business background. Like you want to make sure that you're separating the areas, right? Like we naturally had the same areas that we were good at, so we became very good at a few things. We would like cross check each other's work on the same areas very much so, but there were other areas where we had gaps, and I
Mhm.
think we eventually needed to like say these are your areas, these are my areas, and trust each other in these areas to build a better balance. Someone said that to me recently, and I thought that was such good advice. They said
Yeah.
when you're looking for a partner in business, you want to make sure you have overlapping values and complementary skill sets. And
So true.
and I agree, it's so true. And I think we had to build these complementary skill sets over time. Johannes focused more on product, on creative marketing, and I naturally focused more on finance, operations, and our retail environment.
So you mentioned finance. You guys bootstrapped this initially. How did you then begin to pay for the inventory, the marketing? Did you have investors? Did you do it yourselves? Walk us through how that worked for you.
Well, we had to get investors pretty early on. The unfortunate reality of going to business school was student debt, and um, once we wanted to start the business and live in New York, we needed to earn a salary, or there was just no way for us to live here. So from the very first moment on, we knew we needed to raise money. And that was kind of the focus of our first year out of business school. We were like, hey, let's give each other 6 months to raise financing. If it works, great, we're going to continue. If it doesn't work, then that's it. We got to go back to Germany and move on. And of course, it didn't work after 6 months. But then we were like, okay, maybe it's going to work in 9 months, or maybe it's going to work in 12 months. And I think that's also like generally a dangerous thing. Like you have so many signs of like that give you hope and that feel like great. For example, for us, it was features in Vogue, features in GQ, or celebrities buying our shoes, requesting our shoes. And we were like, there's something there's something there, even though we didn't get to the milestone that we originally set. But ultimately, we used these milestones. We convinced investors to come on board, and we raised financing early on. Looking back, for us, this was kind of like without alternative to go down this path, because we needed to earn some kind of money. But our business is not a typical venture business, right? And I think this is something that a lot of VCs have realized in the last years, and a lot of brands have come to realize too. It's not the typical hockey stick business. Like, we're trying to build a sustainable high-end brand, and that requires time, that requires investment into brand, that requires certain decisions to not just chase short-term revenue, but to really invest in brand building. And there's we were very fortunate to have very good investors and very supportive investors that were on board with this vision. But it's not the typical VC case.
Yeah.
What was the makeup of the team? You know, at some point in time, it's got to go beyond you and Johannes, right?
Yeah, we started hiring as soon as we had our first money in. Our first hire was like kind of a jack of all trade, operations, customer service person that at the time we hired from Warby Parker. Then our second hire was someone who was really good at performance marketing, that we hired from Outdoor Voices at the time.
Smart. Yeah.
And then with this crew of 4 people, we opened our first office shared office space in Soho that was right next to our pop-up store at the time, which is now our flagship store on Lafayette Street and Broome. And with those 4 people, we started grinding initially. And then over time, we started building a bigger and bigger team. Eventually, we hired a product team, like a merchandiser. We hired a designer. We hired like someone who was just working on fit. And we hired a big marketing team. And the team grew. We also opened retail stores, as I said. So the team also grew on the retail front. And then the pandemic hit, and that was again our inflection point. And where we kind of like started to question our journey and think about what are we really doing here, and how do we actually make money, right? We've built this team now. Our revenue sources aren't there as they were. And how can we build a business that sustains for the long run and that ultimately makes money for us and our investors? And that was a big inflection point. And I think around that time, maybe late 2022, early 2023, you also saw a shift in the direct-to-consumer landscape where VCs weren't investing into direct-to-consumer businesses as much. You had a bunch of failed IPOs of bigger DTC brands, and investors were questioning whether this is really a VC case. So all of a sudden, the financing that we and many other brands relied on dried up. And Johannes and I were coming together at that time, looking each other into the eye, and we're like, well, we need to do something to really like make sure that we're self-sustainable. And and it's not going to be pretty, and it needs to be like a rough cut, a complete restructuring, reinvention. And yeah, we started doing that in like mid 2023, and that was like the next phase of our company.
Was that painful?
It was extremely painful. It was extremely painful, but at the same time, also probably the most challenging phase during this and the biggest learning opportunity. But it's always painful if you have to let go of team members, people that you've worked with for a long time. It involved a lot of hard conversations and
Right.
decisions. But what we did was we looked at the business and we were like, let's start with the customer. Let's start interviewing the customer to really understand why are they coming to us. Because the last years before we had grown pretty quickly. We grew from just sneakers for men to sneakers, boots, slippers, dress shoes for men, and then for women the same. And all of a sudden, I feel like no one really knew what Koio stood for anymore. We were marketing everything a little bit, but we had kind of lost our focus. And we started talking to customers to understand why are they coming to Koio? What is it that really brings them here? And we learned that it was the aspect that they wanted sneakers and shoes that they could wear to any and every occasion, that they can dress up and down, where they feel confident and comfortable in all day long. So we went back to our original positioning of we are kind of the dress sneaker for the modern professional. And that meant cutting a lot of SKUs that we had just introduced in the last years, selling through some of that inventory. That also meant, like really having a relentless focus on what really mattered for that brand vision and cutting every noise around it. So that was one part of it. And the other part of it was that we had to let go of a large part of our New York team, shift to a remote setup, and start rehiring internationally. And while that was very painful, it ultimately led to a complete turnaround, made the business profitable, and set us up for long-term success.
So, there's nothing better than chaos to learn from, to, grow, learn, get back to the basics a lot of times and refocus. So it's amazing that you handled that so flawlessly. You probably don't think so, but I'm sure from the outside, it really seems like you handled it flawlessly through that pivot. So what's next for Koio? What does the future look like?
I think in general, like there are a lot of small DTC brands I think a bunch of brands have not been able to get that turnaround done, right? That we're relying on outside financing. So over the last years, we saw a lot of direct-to-consumer brands disappear, unfortunately, even though they had a great brand, great products, but they couldn't get to being financially profitable with offering their exceptional goods at low prices. I think it's really hard in this world to compete with some of the bigger companies that have enormous scale budgets in a world where advertising, customer acquisition has become a lot harder and more expensive. So you see a lot of small, fragmented players trying to challenge the bigger players. And I believe there's going to be like a wave of consolidation happening. And we've actually just like done this step and gotten ahead of it. We've partnered with another group of footwear companies based in Miami, joined together in order to build a footwear platform that has very shared values around Italian craftsmanship and offering a really great product at a much better price point in a DTC way. But together we're trying to bundle up and build like a platform that can operate very well in this environment.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Can you tell us any more about that, or?
Yeah,
more to come?
Uh, no, we've just like completed the process, and I think it's very exciting. The idea here is to build again a footwear platform where on the front end you have all brands remaining unique and staying true to what makes them unique and special. And on the back end, you have shared operations across operations, customer service, back office functions, so that each of these brands doesn't have to bear the costs on their own for that are necessary for operating in this world. So there's like a component of shared cost, and then there's the brand layer on top of it that remains unique. And I think this way we will be able to have a lot more budget for product innovation and add it to areas that are brand accretive and that the customer really cares about, while having the back office functions taken care of. And I think what makes this space so interesting now is also everything that has been going on in AI and tech, where you can realize additional efficiencies, or your team can just get done a lot more faster and has better insights through the newest technologies. So we're working on integrating this newest technology layer now to make each brand as powerful as it can be.
That's amazing.
It really is. I mean, I do think there's marketplace opportunities everywhere. And I think initially they started out broad like Amazon, and I do think they'll be a lot more narrow and focused across products. And, the consumer benefits from that in a big way. But if you can do it and win on a collaborative platform like you're starting to build, I think that's pretty exciting. You had some really interesting collaborations as well, I noticed, that with other brands. Do you think that's something that you would draw into this new vision?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of collaborations over the last 10 years. And in general, collaborations were a way for us to tell the story of an artist through the canvas of a sneaker. And we were picking artists and brand partners that have shared values. So in a way, it was a win-win situation for us and the artists, where we would promote each other, find cost-effective ways to tap into new audiences. That being said, working on collaborations is generally time consuming, and it's not super focused on the core. But if we were to create a sneaker for a celebrity or a brand partner, it generally takes a lot of time, like going from vision, concepting, product development to launching it, marketing it, and selling it. It takes a lot of team time, takes a lot of cost. So we do it like typically once or twice a year. Most recently, we partnered with a coffee maker, the luxury coffee maker La Marzocco. They made a coffee machine, an espresso machine, that was branded with Koio X La Marzocco, and we did the same for shoes. We hosted a party in Soho in our store where customers could come pull their own espresso manually with the beautiful La Marzocco machine, and then we had a bartender that would make it into an espresso martini for you.
Nice.
It was a really cool event. It was super fun. And luckily, they're located where we are located in Florence, in Italy. So it was just a natural fit. But again, these collaborations take a lot of time and effort. So they're not like our key focus.
What would you love? So we've got listeners from founders to executives to, probably want to be entrepreneurs. Maybe they want to develop a direct consumer business in the future for themselves. What's the biggest lesson you've learned that you'd love to communicate to our audience?
I think the biggest lesson I've learned over the last 10 years is that you need to be very reflective and constantly reinvent yourself. Like, you can't just stay still and keep doing what you've done. I think you need to be very aware of the market, the environment, the consumers, and be nimble enough to adjust yourself to it. For us, Yeah, I've talked about a few inflection points today. Like we had three big inflection points. One was COVID, two was the restructuring, and three was competing through a platform approach with bigger brands. And that all of these required like, yeah, being very tapped into the market and into the consumer and like shifting our original business model, pivoting slightly to something that was more appropriate, that let you compete more easily so that you can sustain your brand and ultimately create more value.
Seems like you're humble and open enough to do that too, which I think is a requirement to be nimble. So congratulations to you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a wild journey. Lots of lessons learned, but it's been an exciting one.
You're a young guy and you've got a bright future. And I just think hats off to you for what you created in a competitive space, but a really unique brand. And, anybody that goes to your site immediately connects with it. They don't have to search around. They don't have to wonder, what does this thing stand for? I mean, it's very, very clear. And the other thing is that just the quality of the product shines through. And so many brands really suffered with that. And so you created something out of nothing. And I think our listeners really enjoy hearing this story. And we appreciate you taking the time to tell it. We're excited to see what you do next, because you don't seem to be a guy that's going to sit on his hands.
I'm excited too. Thank you so much, guys. Very nice to speak with you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate us, give us comments, connect with Chris on LinkedIn. I would assume he'd be fine with that. And that way we all get to follow.
That's right.
As you progress through this successful life of yours. Congrats, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.